So, hello everyone. I'm Valentina Rossi, marketing specialist for Zappi Group. I would like to welcome you to this session, and please remember that this session is also being recorded and will be available to watch on demand following this session. If you have any questions during the session, please add them to the question and answer. You can find the tab to the right of your screen. Note that your question will be sent privately. So with that, I would like to introduce our speakers. Welcome to Sue Fortunato-Esbach, regulatory and sustainability expert, and Stephen Borchuk, regional director from Assent. That will be talk about the importance of sustainable supply chain. So welcome Sue and Stephen.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Really happy to be here. Looking forward to it. And as we go through this today, we're going to tag team the presentation a little bit here. So I'll take us through the agenda of a little bit about who we are here at Assent, kind of who you're listening to today, followed by why ESG and sustainability matters and how that relates to your supply chain. I'll hand over then to the significantly smarter member of our team here, who will then walk through the changing legal landscapes, advantages of a sustainable supply chain, and how to build a supply chain sustainability program, where I'll share some insights from some of our customers and other programs, and some of the tips and tricks we've been trying to explore with the market. So without further ado, we'll dive into today. Looking forward to any questions or feedback we have. So you have a bit of perspective as to who you're hearing from today. Assent has been around for just over 13 years. We're a certified B Corp, and we're very proud to say that we have over 750 customers, and that number is growing globally around the world. We focus our solutions on kind of 5 core verticals, but what everyone has in common is that they're durable goods manufacturers like yourselves. We've been lucky enough to have raised some substantial funding and be partnered with some great firms over the years, which has allowed us to grow and scale to over 1,000 employees worldwide. Our European headquarters is actually based in Amsterdam, and our global headquarters is in Ottawa, Canada, where I originally start off from. Now, as we go into this, Assent is really a bridge for organizations between their internal systems and your supply chains. So we have a SaaS platform that we augment with regulatory expertise, consulting, and managed services that really help organizations better engage, educate, and just get transparency into their supply chains and what that means for their products and their overall journey, whether that's environmental, social governance, product compliance, trade compliance, or just overall sustainability today. That's really what we're trying to deliver, and where our expertise comes from is running these type of engagements over the years. But why we're here today is not to talk about us. We're here to talk about the landscape and why at this electrification event, ESG and supply chain sustainability matters, and why, as you build out your programs to try to make a greener world, you need to keep a broader perspective on sustainability to make sure you're pulling the right levers to have an appropriate scaling program. Because ultimately, supply chains were never built with sustainability in mind. And part of that is, I think in my 6 years at Assent, sustainability has been a different thing for a lot of those years. We started with CSR, and then ESG emerged, and now sustainability seems to be the topic set. So to level set, what we're discussing is really trying to kind of give an ESG overview of a broad scope of issues that need to be reported, and we'll get a little bit deeper into how this ecosystem's evolving. But when you break that down to the E, the S, and the G, it's really the environmental impact on the ecosystem, which I know a lot of your products and these improvements on efficiency are coming through when it comes to carbon emissions, resource use, the impacts they can have on the environment. But it's important that as certain decisions are made, supply chain shift, partners and strategic decisions are being made that are going to be in products and in supply chains for a very long time, that we're not neglecting the impact on the people or on the overall governance and corporate behavior of your organization, as all of these topics are becoming more and more intertwined as the supply chain is becoming more and more a part of your actual reporting, your disclosures, your programs. And to kind of put it in a bit of perspective, we actually see for durable goods manufacturers, as we went through a UN principle of responsible investment, that the majority of manufacturers' environmental footprint doesn't actually lie with their products or down the future scope. It actually lies within their supply chain. So when we look at durable goods manufacturers, the direct to indirect kind of supply chain aspects equate between kind of 70 to 90%, depending on your industry, your goods, and your materials that we're sitting through, if whether you're sitting in kind of construction or all the way up into kind of retail or household goods. So it's a very significant portion of your environmental footprint that sits outside of your four walls that you need transparency into so you can really tell that value story of all those efficiencies that you're really placing into the market today. And the pressure on companies is really increasing. Not only are kind of the consumers asking for a better, greener world, but investors are looking to kind of fund organizations that are taking the right steps moving forward. And we actually saw that 85% of investors considered ESG factors when making their portfolio decisions back in 2020. And you can actually imagine that that has only significantly skyrocketed with all the exposure since COVID. So as we go through this, some of the reasons that these investors are looking into these topics is that concerns over ESG have actually outpaced the litigation and settlements in the corporate world, whether that came from insurance, it just passed cybersecurity this year. So actually, because it is a very broad bucket, right, when it comes to governance leading the way, those environmental topics where it come down to greenwashing or environmental chemical compliance, or social topics like human trafficking and slavery and the um, UFLPA legislation in the US today, we're seeing that litigation and settlements are actually being driven around these sustainable topics and shifting from the historically riskier areas, which means insurance is looking at businesses like that and investors are as well. So it's very important to, again, keep this picture in the back of your mind as we start to look into the changing legal landscape and how the markets are looking to regulate this topic. So I'm going to hand over to you, Sue, and mute myself.
Thanks, Stephen. Good afternoon again from my side. All right, so let's have a look at what's happening in the EU when it comes to sustainability. So corporate sustainability, as Stephen mentioned, originated about 20 years ago, and it's always just been voluntary, um, driven by stakeholder pressure. And now we are seeing in Brussels new legislation emerging, which will make corporate sustainability a legal requirement. So up to now, we only had the non-financial reporting directive for large and publicly listed companies, which who under that directive they had to report on their sustainability activities. So, next slide, please, Stephen. If you look at this, you can see in the middle there. So we have two elements of corporate sustainability. We have the reporting and we have the due diligence. So this slide focuses on the reporting. So in December 2022, so just 6 months ago, the EU published the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive. It has now been enacted, and this directive requires companies, estimated around 59,000 companies in the EU, to report on their sustainability activities. So this they will have to align their reporting in accordance with the ESRS. So these are European Sustainability Reporting Standards, which are under development by the European Financial Reporting Advisory Group, EFRAG. On the right-hand side, you can see the SFDR from 2019. The Sustainable Finance Disclosure Regulation is supplementary because it requires financial service providers and owners of financial products to assess and disclose ESG considerations publicly. Closely aligned with the CSRD is what we call the EU taxonomy. The EU taxonomy regulation from 2020 amended the SFDR, and this is a classification system which is, basically establishes a list of processing and manufacturing activities and economic activities that can be classified as environmentally sustainable. So this helps companies to access funding that is earmarked for ESG if companies can prove that their manufacturing processes are sustainable in accordance with the criteria laid down by this regulation. If we go on to the next slide, the previous one where you just were. Yeah, the Corporate Sustainability Due Diligence Directive. So that is the other side of corporate sustainability, the reporting and the due diligence. The due diligence will be mandated under the CS3D, which is currently still in the legislative process. It's not been enacted yet. This will establish duty of care, and companies will have to implement mandatory human rights and environmental due diligence. You will probably know, or you might know from the German Supply Chain Due Diligence Act, the elements are similar. The German Act was the first one in the EU of this kind. And both of these, the Sustainability Reporting Directive and the Due Diligence Directive, focus on companies' operations. We will also see, or we are also seeing legislative initiatives on product level. So the EU proposed ban on forced labor that will require all products that are being placed on the market that to be banned and banned from export, banned from selling if those products have been manufactured using forced labor. So the other product relevant sustainability regulation that's emerging from Brussels is the ESPR, which is the Eco Design for Sustainable Products Regulation, which will require products to be sustainable by design. Okay, next slide. Now let's have a look at another initiative. This is the Greenwashing Claims or Green Claims Directive. So this is an initiative to combat greenwashing. Companies will have to substantiate any green claims that they make about the environmental friendliness or for example, the climate impact or non-toxic characteristics of their products, by ensuring that those claims can be substantiated by fulfilling minimum criteria, such as, for example, that the whole life cycle of the product has been taken into account, and that the evidence is based on scientific and state-of-the-art technical knowledge. Now let's move on to the advantages of a sustainable supply chain. Because yes, sustainability will be mandated by law and it will be required by stakeholders, or it is already required by stakeholders, but that doesn't mean that it doesn't provide many advantages to companies. So we have three elements how ESG can affect a company's bottom line. On the one hand, or the first one is market access. So as I just explained, we have the legal requirements that are upcoming without, for example, complying with the proposed EU forced labor ban, or looking across the pond in America, the UFLPA, products may not be placed on the market. And in fact, authorities, so the US Customs and Border Agency can block products from entering the US for circulation. So that's a market access issue. Same in the EU, market surveillance authority and order products to be recalled, withdrawn from the market. And again, companies could then experience significant financial loss. At the same time, we also have customer requirements. So if you have a customer who has enforces sustainability requirements onto their suppliers, either on operational level or in the actual components parts that the customer buys from the supplier, and the supplier cannot fulfill those requirements, then the customer will not buy from the supplier. So that's also a market access issue. In the middle, we have, or the second element is how having a sustainable supply chain can actually act as a value driver. So upstream processes act directly or indirectly as value drivers, because when raw materials are carefully selected and processed into intermediate products, they can directly promote product quality. ESG impacts in the supply chain, like, for example, inhumane working conditions, serious environmental pollution in upstream processes, are risk indicators that speak against the reliability of product and the reliability of suppliers and good quality products. And then the third element is brand reputation. So companies are increasingly being held accountable for social and environmental impacts of their upstream processes. So when you invite human rights violations, so for example, there's a factory that burned down due to lack of health and safety, and that manufacturer of the final finished goods can be tied back to that factory, where the components that are being manufactured in that factory are being sold to, for example, a manufacturer of finished goods. That will normally always be reported in the media and will raise eyebrows, and that can then result in a public scandal for the company, with a risk of loss of reputation, which can have a negative impact on business success. So let's look at some concrete advantages of sustainable supply chain management. So ESG risk management can provide direct and indirect financial benefits to companies. So the first thing is that when you have a sustainable supply chain, you have a transparent supply chain, because you need to detect ESG risk and impacts in your supply chain. And for that, you need transparent, robust data. But sustainable supply chains can also result in a more resilient supply chain. For example, to ensure business continuity. Going back to that example of the factory burning down because the health and safety rules were not implemented, or they were not either the health and safety rules were not being complied with, or the local country does not have health and safety rules that are good enough to protect workers. And the company did not take care of that as part of its due diligence in the supply chain. If we imagine now that that factory produces key components that are being sold to a manufacturer of finished goods, so finished durable goods, and due to the fire, there's all the stock had to be scrapped. The machinery is broken, destroyed, and workers with key knowledge and know-how are injured and in hospital. Then that manufacturer will find himself with a big problem if he doesn't have enough stock in his own factory in the EU. That will mean that he cannot produce the products that he needs to produce to sell to his customers, which can then result in contract breach when he cannot sell to his customer who ordered from him. So this can snowball into large financial losses. Business continuity is a key concern for a lot of manufacturers, but many of them don't realize that ESG risk in the supply chain has a big impact on business continuity. The second point or advantage I would like to highlight is designing efficient business processes. Supply chain management can allow resource, energy, and transport costs to be systematically compiled. And when you keep an eye on the cost, you can continually decrease the cost when companies design their own processes in a more efficient way. For example, by decreasing the demand for materials, especially materials that are rare and cost a lot of money, and also decrease manufacturing costs. A third advantage is making products sustainable by design, as is foreseen by the proposed Eco-Design for Sustainable Products regulation, can positively affect a company's bottom line, because a smaller environmental and social footprint results in financial value creation. But for that, companies will need to take care of the 3 Ps, the triple bottom line: people, planet, and profit. Adjustments like using ethically sourced materials or cutting down on energy consumption, streamlining shipping practices, using renewable energy sources are all steps in the right direction. You can jump to the next slide. Then reduction in costs through better financial risk management, as I mentioned, business continuity, but also market access issues, fines, litigation, goods that have been impounded. For example, Customs and Borders Control in the US impounding goods because they're suspected of violating the UFLPA, so the UK Forced Labor Protection Act. These are all costs that companies can avoid. And then Stakeholder confidence. So you can increase the confidence of your employees, your investors, civil society, customers by showing that you have a robust supply chain sustainability program in place. And then a point that Stephen already just quickly raised before, funding. A good ESG rating, proof of ESG due diligence, can help companies access better interest rates for funding or provide access to ESG investment funds, so funds that are earmarked for ESG investments, especially because in the EU, those activities, for example, comply with the criteria for sustainability under the EU taxonomy regulation. And next slide, thanks. So let's have a look at ESG reporting. So you can see here an overview of the ESG, all the different elements, as Stephen already highlighted. But since this is all about electrification today, I want to just focus a bit more on the environmental part. So the environmental part of ESG covers, in accordance with the Global Reporting Index and the United Nations Global Compact Sustainable Development Goals, climate impact, which includes GHG emissions reporting, carbon reduction targets, and renewable energy, resource use, biodiversity, and chemicals handling or product stewardship. So I want to hone in a little bit on the climate impact. Next slide. So carbon reduction strategy consists of reducing carbon emissions by changing operational processes, so making operational changes as a business, and offsetting carbon emissions. Electrification, powered by renewables, is an opportunity to foster a clean energy transition. Global decarbonization can be accelerated through clean electrification. And with clean, I mean the process of replacing fossil fuels with electricity produced from renewable sources like wind, solar, and hydro. Electrification also provides other benefits, which I'm sure you guys already know, improved energy efficiency and improved public health due to lower levels of air pollution. When it comes to offsetting carbon emissions, that's a different kettle of fish. So offsetting carbon emissions can be good as a complementary measure to reducing carbon emissions by making operational changes. But what often happens is, and this is one of the biggest criticisms of carbon offsetting schemes, is that companies think they have a free pass to continue business as usual, so making no changes in their operations to reduce carbon emissions, continuous use of fossil fuels, but then offsetting everything through carbon offsetting schemes. So then they say, oh, our products are completely CO2 neutral. In the meantime, they didn't make any changes. They just invested a lot in carbon offsetting schemes. And you do have schemes that are really good, but you also have schemes, as I will show you on the next slide, which are irresponsible and where companies that invest in such schemes did not do their due diligence in terms of making sure that it is actually a scheme with integrity. And if we look at the Paris Climate Agreement and under the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change and the 1.5 degrees Celsius goal, that goal can only be reached if companies do both offsetting and reduction of greenhouse gas emissions. So this here, as you can see on the slide, this is an article from The Guardian. I recommend for you to read it. You can find the link at the bottom of the slide, which the deck will be shared afterwards. This was uncovered a big scheme of offsets that lacked the principle of additionality and that therefore did not do any offsetting. So what happened was a key criterion for carbon offsetting is additionality. That means that the offset must provide an extra reduction in carbon that would not have happened any other way. So, for example, planting a tree that would not have been planted, or saving a tree which would otherwise have been felled. So, in this example, and covered by The Guardian, many examples actually, some of them in the United States, patches of forested land were used for carbon offsetting, with investors being told if they invest in this project, then the land will not be developed and the trees will be protected. In the meantime, it transpired that the land was never even at risk for development, with the threat to forests overstated by about 400%. So this is called carbon greenwashing. Then just some other headlines on greenwashing that might be of interest to you. This is all in 2022. So fines handed out to companies due to greenwashing. And then on the last slide of this section, I gave you some tips. If you jump to the next slide, Stephen, some tips from the United Kingdom government on how to avoid greenwashing as a company. So checking, you must be able to answer yes to all of these 13 questions in order to avoid greenwashing. So this brings us to the last section of the presentation, building a supply chain sustainability program. So this is based on our experience with our clients and also research done. So the first most important thing is to start with a risk analysis. Without a risk analysis, without any data, you can't start to establish or develop a supply chain sustainability program. So you need to look at your supply chain and identify or detect ESG risk, and then take corrective action to mitigate that risk, and also take preventive action to prevent that risk from, or those impacts from, surfacing in future. So preempting the risk. So as part of that, engaging with direct suppliers is very important. You need the data from your direct suppliers. Directly with suppliers is essential to survey them on their business operations and their policies. So to this end, you can use technology for automated supply chain data collection, which can help you save time and money. But it also goes beyond direct suppliers. Materiality analysis, so the analysis of your material risk in your supply chain, often reveals that most of the most negative impacts, so the most salient risks, are often hidden further, deeper up the supply chain. So at suppliers level or tier 2, 3, 4, etc. So for every measure, corrective action that you take or preventive action, it's important to consider how sub-suppliers can be integrated into that action. So for example, if you have a code of conduct and you pass it on to your supplier, it's not enough to have him sign it and you file it away. You need to make sure that he's actually going to implement the rules of the code of conduct in his business processes and pass it on to his supplier. So for that, you need data from him in terms of how he is actually implementing the rules. And then in order to deal with those sub-suppliers, it can be a real struggle for companies to get data from those suppliers because there's no direct business relationship with them. And that's where it's useful to make use of indirect and enhanced supplier screening methods, such as adverse media monitoring and geo-risk assessment. Adverse media monitoring focuses on industry-specific risks, and risk assessment on country-specific risks across the supply chain. Then another good tip is to use industry standard surveys to collect data from your suppliers. These surveys are built to cascade data or cascade the survey down the supply chain to give you deep visibility into risks and collect robust data. The point is that with using these industry standard surveys, suppliers are being asked the same questions on the same topics, and they can use that same survey or the answers to communicate not only data to you, but also to their other customers. So it saves the suppliers time and money, and it prevents supplier fatigue. So for example, there are some examples such as the Slavery and Trafficking Risk Template, STRT, the Extended Minerals Reporting Template, the EMRT, or the Global Reporting Index, GRI, Universal Standards, Sector Standards, and Topic Standards. Then determining sustainability impacts and risks can be very overwhelming. So when you start out with your program, you might feel that there's just too much to deal with. So too many fires burning at the same time. And that's where it's important to focus on the most salient risks. And for that, you need to do an assessment of the risk. So looking at the severity of the harm if the risk materializes and the likelihood of the risk materializing. So a risk assessment with a matrix that you might know from, for example, health and safety law. And by doing that, so looking at the severity and the likelihood, you can classify the risk into the most salient ones and focus on those first and deal with the rest later. You can jump to the next slide. Related to that is the fact that this is a long-term journey. So it's a marathon, not a sprint. So you're not going to start out with a supply chain sustainability program, do it for a year, and think then it's over. It's a continuous work in progress. As you gather data from the supply chain, you exchange, you start understanding the risks of your supply chain in the industry. You exchange information maybe with other businesses in the industry through trade associations. You forge links with direct and sub-suppliers. And then over time, more possibilities and approaches to optimal sustainable supply chain management materialize, and you'll see the return on investment. And then my last point is something that I personally find really, really important: supplier development. An educated and well-supported supply chain is a compliant supply chain. In order to build a sustainable supply chain, it's essential to invest in supplier training and support, making sure that your supplier understands your requirements and the legal requirements. After you discover ESG risk in the supply chain, as I said, you should take the corrective and preventive action. But it's also important to make sure that the supplier A, understands the issue, and B, implements the corrective actions, and then that you follow up on that instead of just replacing the supplier when you discover a high-risk supplier in your supply chain. The reason why this is so important is you want to work towards a positive customer-supplier relationship that builds supplier competence in the long term. This will contribute to your suppliers in less developed countries, improving incrementally until they are able to operate in a reasonably sustainable manner within the framework of their local conditions. And this is the ideal trickle-down effect of EU sustainability legislation on due diligence that targets the economic operators at the top of the value chain. And with that, I'm going to hand over to Stephen to finish off for us.
No, really appreciate it, Sue. And as we come through, kind of building off those fundamental tips, I want to share a little bit of insight as to how Assent has been approaching this topic set for our customers over the past few years, and how we're looking in the future to continue to reinforce these areas to ensure that you get access to the subject matter experts like Sue and her team, to ensure that we understand the landscape coming down, how that's going to affect our individual customers and their businesses, making sure you have that expertise in your corner, but also having sure you can kind of tell that story to senior management to get that support, that buy-in, and understand where you sit in your journey. So what we've done here at Assent, it's on our website right now, and I've shared the link if you can't click on it in the presentation as live, is we've actually created a very high level sustainability maturity model, if you will, that is taking organizations from supply chain compliance planning to kind of very basic understanding of where they sit today to the ultimate future state where, to be honest, no one is today, of deep sustainability, where you're kind of leading everything to net zero, understanding all of the risks and proactively managing those through the supply chain. We found this has been a very interesting exercise to do in your cross-functional teams in your organization who may be touching topics like conflict minerals, REACH, these new sustainability greenhouse gas emissions, to get a bit of a picture to see where the different stakeholders think you fit, and comparing that information amongst yourselves as you go through this. So what Assent's really tried to do is create a solution that's designed for complex durable goods manufacturers who sit up that value chain, right? You're not generally sourcing all of your raw materials. So you need to have that kind of pillar of direct engagement, indirect monitoring, and access to guidance and expertise to understand not only what the law is requiring or the directive's intention is, but also what others in industry are doing, where you sit. We all understand that regulators, government officials, maybe less so investors, understand that this is a journey where no one's going to be 100% perfect. No one's going to have 100% of the data 100% of the time. But what you need to be able to do is that you show that you have this cyclical process of continual improvement with real-time reporting and value looking at that supply chain. And one of the earlier questions raised, I think, by Antonio in the chat came up, and this is really how Assent tries to handle some of these topics of the shift into the new world, new supply chains, where we're trying to shift to maybe, I would say, newer topics or newer materials that may be coming from less savory places. Is the most logical place to start is direct engagement, right? So physically reaching out to the suppliers who are providing you, asking to them to show not only a signed declaration or statement that they do not have any of those materials, but that they also have policies in place to track that their supply chain does not also have those. But then cross-checking that and kind of having your insurance on the background with your enhanced supplier screening. So pairing direct engagement with that monitoring, which can fit in a few different buckets. And here at Ascent, we really take kind of 3 or 4 different views. We do have kind of a holistic smelter library to try to understand where raw materials are coming from, which ones are higher risk than others that we should be looking through. But we also have the ability to kind of pair our enhanced screening in 2 other ways, which is to have that adverse media. So if a supplier says, we do not use any child labor, but a news article is bubbling up in their local market in that language, we can flag that as a risk to maybe counteract that claim. Because again, not every tweet is a contradictory statement, right? You may have disgruntled employees, you may have other things. So we want to manage that trend over time, saying, hey, some tweets aroused, oh, it got picked up by a local newspaper, now it's getting picked up by the Guardian. Hey, here's what's going on. You guys really want to maybe reach out to these people, create some distance between yourself and those suppliers. And on the flip side, with all the worlds of sanctions we live in today, also scroll through the beneficial owners of those organizations. So peel back the onion to understand that, oh, maybe that is an oligarch who owns that mine. Maybe they own 49%, and you can't really get that disclosed in your original onboarding documents. So just some additional ways to try to kind of have background checks and get more data to help reinforce the question sets that come through. And Assent's approach, holistically, to Sue's point, is really aligned to that sentiment of taking a marathon journey with your suppliers, understanding who's willing to commit to this partnership with you, and giving them the resources to improve over time and measure that improvement so you can report it out. Sustainability is a journey. So you need to understand where you are today, where you're going in the future, where your goal is, and how you're getting there. It's not going to be a linear approach. So when we say you need data back from your supply chain, one of the things is you need to reach out and ask for information. A non-response is extremely valuable information, right? It may mean they don't care about your partnership as a business. It may mean they don't have any understanding of these topics. So we can send them down different corrective action paths. And that can lead to more education. It could just giving them some insights into the risks on how they can improve their scores moving forward. But for yourselves, that's really giving you a way to get higher quality data and intelligence around your supply chain. So as we're building these supplier relationships with yourselves, you're also getting more insight and more actionable data year over year over year. Now, when we talk about our ESG solution alone, we do have a number of other solutions that we didn't bring through today, like our conflict minerals solution. We have a number of product compliance solutions and trade solutions that range from managing REACH compliance, the EU Waste Framework Directive, SCIP database, PFAS solutions that are aligned to the local regulations. But one theme at Assent that Sue mentioned is we always try to align to industry standards and best practices to, again, make sure we're meeting the suppliers where they are and asking similar questions that their other customers may be asking to get the highest likelihood of getting information back. So to take climate impact as an example, We've aligned to the GRI and UN SDGs, but we also want to meet the suppliers where they are and not overwhelm them. So we actually have build level questionnaires and surveys in there. So the first question they'd see in the greenhouse gas section, as an example, would just say, hey, do you report on any greenhouse gas scoping emissions? And if they say no, they're not going to have any other questions because they have no more data to provide. But if they say yes, then we'll have follow-up questions. Do you report on scope 1, scope 2, scope 3? And they'll only see relevant information around those areas. The idea there is you need to create the barrier for entry to be as low as possible to get these baselines and data, but allow for the suppliers who are further along to kind of beat their chest and say, we are great. Here's our amazing policies. Give us more money, give us more business. Let's be a better partner. So you want to capture as much data as possible while not creating the burden and overwhelming those suppliers who may have a little bit of information that's extremely valuable in the get-go, especially when you're building corrective action paths, but not overwhelming them by giving them a 100-question survey when they don't have that information up front. And we just wanted to give a couple visuals. Again, it's not really about Assent here today, but it's important that you're tracking that supplier performance in real time over time. You're not only tracking like the responses coming back, but the overall engagement, where those sit across different topic sets, because all of these are interconnected. You may have some suppliers who are phenomenal at reducing climate impact, as we're talking electrification, and I see a lot of questions coming through here on that topic set. But also, you need to make sure that that's not at the cost or sacrifice of another piece of the business that may be extremely important for monitoring your business going forward. And then ultimately, you need to be able to consolidate that data in real time and report it out. And ultimately, for some of the organizations here, you may be writing your own sustainability reports. You may be falling in scope of some of this reporting initiatives. But as an example, here's an insert that we can put into our customers' programs based off data we would collect from the supply chain on kind of scope 3, again, aligned to the GRI standards here that would just come through, just some data that would come from your supply chain that would allow you to understand kind of where your suppliers sit. And this is obviously a very great level of engagement where 85% of your supply chain has a concrete plan that they can report on. That may not be the reality, but they also you have some stances saying, hey, well, last year it was 9% under development. This year we did some actions, we mandated some contracts. We actually got some of those suppliers to move into at least reporting on scope 1 or scope 2 or scope 3 as we move forward, breaking that down into valuable information that makes sense for you. And again, is aligned to what investors are looking to see, regulators are looking to see. And that's really what we're trying to get as an organization. And I know this is a very short window, a very long conference with a lot of other information. So we wanted to provide access to our resources and teams. Our website has a ton of free resources. We think educating the market is going to make the whole market and suppliers and our customers better in the world. So we have a lot of free resources, webinars, white papers, ebooks. The maturity model is linked here again. It's a free tool for yourself to use. You can take a peek at the ESG solution or our product compliance solutions. But ultimately, if you want to have a deeper conversation, I need to know what's going on in the market. Our teams do as well. So I'd be more than happy to just field an email. Feel free to call my cell phone, WhatsApp me. I love talking about this stuff. This has been my life for the last 6 years, and I want it to be my life for the foreseeable future. So learning what other organizations are doing, what your stances are, your challenges are, help us iterate and provide better insight back to our customers, right? We work with 750 manufacturers. There's hundreds, thousands, if not millions out there that ultimately we're touching or trying to touch in some way. So any input is valuable input. And I want to thank everyone for their time and patience today.
Okay, so we answered to the question from Antonio, and I see another question about emission of the batteries. The batteries are good or not? And if yes, which one is the best, basically?
I would start actually with Antonio's first question because they build up on each other. So can we start with the one on the electrification, suspicious labor, or human rights risks surrounding extraction of minerals, such as lithium, for example, that is used for also batteries production of electric vehicles. So, by the way, I love the questions. They're so topical. The EU proposed the batteries regulation, It's to replace the existing batteries directive. It's now in the final stages of the legislative process, so we're expecting it actually to be published in the official journal of the EU in Q2. So now in the coming months, and so this targets the minerals that are used for batteries production. So manufacturers of industrial batteries and EV batteries, electric vehicle batteries, will have to conduct mandatory supply chain due diligence on the sourcing of those minerals to ensure exactly what Antonio addressed here, that we don't start expanding the use. We phase out the combustion engine by 2050. We need those minerals, but then they're associated with gross human rights violations. That's we want to improve our sustainability. We want to contribute to combating climate. We don't want to do that on the back of people who are minerals. So that's the one thing. Simon, this addresses actually Antonio's second question on recycling of minerals and reuse of minerals. The batteries regulation will also implement mandatory quotas for recycled content of cobalt, for example, and lithium, so that a battery must, for example, consist of 10% recycled lithium content to reduce the EU's dependence on extraction of minerals in third countries. And this links up again with Mohammed's question. Fascinating question. I will also let Stephen talk about that a little bit. Yes, batteries, emissions, immense. Of course, the vehicle itself, fantastic, no CO2 emissions, but the CO2 footprint of the battery in order to manufacture it is immense. And the EU published the Critical Raw Materials, or published a proposal for a Critical Raw Materials Act. During COVID, the EU, so the European Commission realized that the EU is too dependent on minerals from the supply chain, lithium, for example, from China, and we want to see the EU have a more circular economy when it comes to critical minerals. Obviously, those mineral deposits are not located in the EU, or very little. Therefore, they will always be sourcing from third countries, but the EU wants to expand, to diversify the sources of those minerals. So, for example, looking at Chile, looking at Australia, but then also implement better recycling and looping that back into manufacturing. So if you have reduced mining of minerals, improved recycling, and feeding it back into the production, you can also reduce the carbon footprint. But it's not going to make it, as low as right now. Technology does not permit it to be as low as it should be. So, Stephen, do you want to add some more on that?
No, I think it's an interesting topic, and I know you're pointing on me on because I had a very heated conversation about this topic set the other day. But as you go through this, I think it's all about trying to understand what your goals and your objectives are. We are a kind of supply chain transparency business. We have a lot of customers who are going down these rabbit holes and avenues. I am by no means a kind of expert when it comes into the differences of having different types of batteries and what those emission impacts could be as you go through it. There are going to be areas where you're going to know what's happening inside your four walls in your business better than anyone could outside of them. But it's always a balancing act of making sure you're trying to get as full a picture as possible. And the life cycle of a vehicle starts, or the life cycle of a motor starts when, right? It's kind of that sliding scale. Does it start when the original company started mining the ground and extracting ore that was then manufactured into a finished product that could then be used? It's a sliding scale right now, and I think we're all waiting for some clarity on how to go through and utilize that information. But to go back to what we've kind of been beating the drum for, and the reason for it is you can only do kind of what's industry best practice or what guidance is out there, right? When you go out on a limb and you make some assumptions or claims, if they're not validated or backed up by the market or by regulators or other guidelines, you're putting yourself at risk to have those claims challenged and potential liability. So there's that fine line of walking and saying, hey, we're doing this amazing thing versus making a statistical claim or making a specific reference. And that kind of ties back into that greenwashing topic is when you talk about capturing your emissions, what you're reporting on, I think it's very important to always be clear about what your goals are and where net zero or 20% reduction or 50% reduction, what the baseline is being referred to and against that. Because if you're talking about the emissions of just batteries moving forward, are you factoring in the disposal of that battery as part of its life cycle? Are you factoring in the mining of the minerals coming into it, which is extremely far down the chain and almost impossible for you to get that data, but you want to have some impact on it? Um, it's a tricky question, Mohammed, to be honest with you, but one that we're having lots of conversations with in the background. So if you also have any ideas, topics, or other questions in more detail, I'd be more than happy to hear them and convey them to the team.
And I think it's good to see that the EU, so the Commission has this on their agenda, that they know resource efficiency, recycling will become so much more important going forward if we want to achieve the green transition to a green economy. It's otherwise it will be impossible to achieve. So yeah, watch the space.
I have another question. In Assent, does you have any plan to support and educate your suppliers on their sustainability and electrification journey?
Yeah, it's a good question, and one that's actually to the larger audience here as well, right? Is how do you plan on educating when you're building those baselines or those guides? So here at Ascent, we have a free learning management platform that's available to any supplier of our customers. And we also have corrective actions built in and real-time reporting back out of the tool. So try and provide real-time feedback on the responses they're giving, and not just giving a number score where they don't understand how we came to that methodology, but also trying to give them paths for corrective actions so that they can try to improve that store or provide a little bit more clarity around what they're doing to make sure that the information's accurate and being restored. But also, we like to just provide that free education in our supplier help center. But also, when we reach out for information, there's always educational content on the topics that's built in. It's really important to make sure that an educated supply chain is a responsive supply chain, because you want people to be able to get education in their local language, get supported in their local time zone, in their local dialect. So that's all part and parcel of our solution and how we try to engage the suppliers for our customers. And I'd love to understand, for organizations who are taking this journey, trying to go down these paths, is it just a procurement data point that you're trying to get back, and what's the level of success there? Are you collecting that feedback? Are you understanding the trends within your supply chain? That's always something we're very interested in learning about.
Okay, and do you think that this topic is still an underdog topic from the companies? Because there are different rules, different basically, yes.
Yeah, there's a lot of dueling
Government,
priorities.
yeah.
Yeah, it's very tricky. I would say if you asked me this 2 years ago, I would have said yes. As we slide in and the legislation is making it more and more concrete, both in North America and in Europe, and some other countries are looking to follow suit outside of the two largest markets. I would say it's becoming a larger and larger priority. People have been beating their chest writing sustainability reports for years, right? The C-suite likes to discuss those topics, but when it comes to funding these initiatives, it has been a bit of a challenge in previous years. However, moving forward, I think it's understanding the education and how to get that message and buy-in internally, that the actual risk of starting 2 years from now is putting you 4 years behind the curve, because you need baseline data, you need baseline education and information so that you can create targets. Because right now, what we've been seeing, unfortunately, is a lot of organizations build targets, make claims for where they're going to be in 2030 or 2025, but they have no idea where they are today. So how
Exactly.
are you going to show a 30% reduction? And that really is a challenge for the operational folks who are trying to kind of use their time and resources effectively as possible. But that's where our solution tries to come in, is allow you to use your time to be as impactful as possible and offload some of that high admin task to our side, right? Let the supply chain communication teams who are already overloaded focus on their core activities and hand off some of these more specialized topics to experts who can provide that level of support. And if you're doing it at scale, we can afford to spread those costs off, leverage the technology, leverage our 13 years of experience and the 1,000+ team we have behind the scenes to kind of optimize those programs to make them as efficient, affordable, and valuable as possible.
Okay, so I don't see any question right now. So I want only to thank you, Sue, and thank you, Stephen, for being with us, for answering all the questions and for sharing your knowledge with us. Okay.
Perfect. And one
Thank
last
you.
selfish plug: we are going to have our big sustainability conference called Assent Evolve. You can Google it. I forgot to put the link in the presentation. It's actually a free 2-day virtual conference where we'll be going through a number of these topics in great detail. So for those of you who want to learn more, feel free to go to the website. Like I said, it's free to register. There'll be recordings of the sessions. We have some amazing speakers coming. We're also talking about some of these chemical compliance topics. So we have like Aaron Brockovich is coming and giving a keynote on some of these areas coming through. So it'll be an extremely educational couple of days. And I think if you are someone who's interested in this space, it's worth just signing up to make sure you get the content after the fact. And if you can attend, amazing. But if not, I want to make sure everyone's getting as many resources as we can put in the marketplace.
So maybe we can put the link in the chat.
Yeah, perfect. I will do
Okay.
that.
So thank you, everybody.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.